People who suffer from hay fever will assure you that there is no disease more dreadful known to man. Vermont folk medicine divides hay fever into 3 classes: mild, moderately severe, and severe. Its treatment is both preventative and symptomatic. If honeycomb cappings are chewed once each day for 1 month before the expected hay fever date, the hay fever will either not appear or will be mild in character. In mild hay fever, the treatment taken once a day on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of each week will keep the nose open and dry. If honeycomb is not available, take 2 teaspoonfuls of liquid honey at each meal. Moderately severe hay fever should be treated by chewing honeycomb 5 times each day for the first 2 days and 3 times a day thereafter for as long as needed. It is a good plan to eat comb honey each day if it is available. If not, the 2 teaspoonfuls of liquid honey, as sold at the grocery store, will prove effective. In moderately severe hay fever, the following has been observed. Watery eyes would be dry in 3 minutes. Stopped up nose would begin to open up in 3 minutes. In 6 minutes, the nose would be clear for comfortable breathing with the mouth closed. Running nose would be dry in 5 minutes. Raw throat would be relieved in 3 to 5 minutes. Where hay fever is severe, Vermont folk medicine advises the following. 3 months before the expected onset, take 1 tablespoonful of honey after each meal as a dessert. Comb honey is best, but liquid honey will work. It is sometimes referred to as strained honey. Also take 1 tablespoonful of honey in 1/2 glass of water at bedtime. 2 weeks before the expected onset date, take a mixture of 2 teaspoonfuls of honey and 2 teaspoonfuls of apple cider vinegar to a half or whole glass of water, before breakfast and again at bedtime. This should be continued during your hay fever season. Continue taking 1 tablespoonful of honey after the midday meal and supper as a dessert, and at the same time keeping up the vinegar and honey mixture before breakfast and at bedtime. If necessary, chew honeycomb often enough during the day to keep the nose open and dry. I have observed these results from this treatment. The vinegar-honey combination plus chewing honeycomb work better than hay fever shots. Whereas the shots do not prevent the presence of mucus in the nose, there is no mucus when the Vermont folk medicine treatment is used. 2. No matter how bad the hay fever is, with eyes and nose itching, when this treatment is followed, there will be only a little sneezing and no watery discharge. While I have not checked all these findings, I am told by those whose experience with Vermont folk medicine goes beyond my studies that the following results may be noted as early as the 3rd day. 1. Sneezing stopped. 2. Dry eyes in 3 minutes. 3. Dry nose in 5 or 6 minutes. 4. Can pet the dog. 5. Can pet the cat. 6. Can feed the chickens. 7. Can milk the cow. 8. Can ride the horse. 9. Can sleep under wool blankets. 10. Can sleep on a feather pillow. 11. Can work in the flower garden. 12. Can cut ragweed. 13. Can smell the rose. Further results observed are that the chewing of honeycomb 3 or 4 times a week will eradicate hay fever in 3 years' time. I have seen particularly interesting effects of this treatment in cases where work placed those who had suffered from hay fever in conditions regarded as extremely aggravating. For example, a high school boy worked on a farm. When the cows were fed late in the day, it was his job to empty bags of grain into the herd feeding car. Every time he did this, his nose would run water and block up, and his eyes would pour forth water. He was given honeycomb to chew 3 times a day. By the end of 1 week, he could do his job without any discomfort from nose and eyes. Another high school boy who worked on a farm was experiencing very little trouble with his hay fever while he chewed honeycomb 3 times a day. I asked him to stop chewing it while he was in the midst of haying, so that we might test the responsibility of the honeycomb for freeing him of the hay fever. He did so. For 7 days he remained free of it, even in the dust of haying. But on the 8th day his hay fever returned in all its old-time severity, and suddenly he was miserable. I started him up again on the honeycomb immediately. A week later I went out to the farm to see how he was getting along. He was on top of a hayload, storing the hay pitched up to him by the loader. I asked him how things were. "Fine," he grinned down at me. "No sneezing, clear nose all the time. No more time off from honeycomb for me." Lest the reader think these effective results are limited to Vermont, where the people have an ingrained experience with the remedies of folk medicine, I received information of an occurrence in Texas. An experiment in the treatment of hay fever was started in April 1936 at William Beaumont General Hospital in El Paso. As the pollen season progressed from March to its height in August, so many cases of hay fever developed, and symptoms were so severe in El Paso and vicinity that a public campaign was begun against the weeds responsible and partially carried out in the city. Army personnel stationed here produced a heavy share of sufferers, and it was they who provided the stimulus for the experiment, together with one curious fact which came to light for the first time that year. Among the many home remedies for the treatment of hay fever which were brought up in discussion with the afflicted, one alone seemed of real value. Several individuals stated that in the past year or two they had received varying degrees of relief from symptoms by eating honey produced in their vicinity, and particularly from the chewing of the honeycomb wax. A boy 8 years old was brought by his mother to my office for an examination and treatment of his nose. For 5 months he had had a continuous head cold which no treatment had favorably influenced. There was a profuse watery discharge and frequent nose blowing was required. This boy had had his tonsils and adenoids removed when he was 3 years old. Examination of his nose showed an appearance which would be present in hay fever, but it was too early for a Vermont hay fever season. The mucous membrane in the nose was very pale and boggy in appearance. The boy breathed through his mouth because normal breathing was interfered with by a swelling in the nose tissues. Following the general examination and the special examination of his nose, I gave the boy a chew of honeycomb to learn what might happen. I wrote out directions for treatment to be followed at home and prepared drops he was to take. Before I had finished this, after about 5 minutes, the boy suddenly said, "My nose is open. I can breathe through it." I gave the medicine for home use to the mother and discussed the written directions. Then I examined the boy's nose again to see what the honeycomb had accomplished. The nose tissues had subsided, as they would have if I had used a shrinking agent in the nose. Instead of being pale, the mucous membrane was now light pink in color. 1 week later, at the next office visit, the boy's nose was still open and he was breathing with his mouth closed. In my office at another time, I gave a woman with a large and very narrow nose 1 chew of cappings to learn whether it would shrink down the nose tissues enough to enable her to breathe through her nose. The airway in each side of her nose was exceptionally narrow. At the end of 5 minutes she was able to breathe through her nose very much better, and this 1 chew of cappings kept her nose open for 2 weeks. The chewing of honeycomb when a stuffy nose was present was tried with other patients, all with the same satisfactory results.